Luffy just made a big mistake. His mistake was not finishing his meat before leaping into combat with a Marine Admiral. Doesn't matter though, because Luffy's confident. He's got haki, he's got gears, and he's got these like sick floating future boot things. So Kizaru doesn't know what's about to hit him, but just between you and me, it's gonna be one of the aforementioned boots. One Piece is back. I feel like I say that every week because we're on a bit of a brutal schedule right now. It's been chapter break, chapter break, chapter break, and I think probably chapter break. And next week it'll be a break too. That's because Eiichiro Oda went on a lovely work holiday to Los Angeles to attend a screening of live-action One Piece, where he very sneakily snuck in to watch everyone's reactions. And normally I would say, Oda, mate, you do you. Live your best life and all of that, but don't leave me on this wild cliffhanger when you're doing it. Luffy versus Kizaru is actually happening, and it's been about 15 years in the making, because that's about how long it's been since their first interaction on Sabaody. Luffy now claims to be 100 times stronger than he was back then, which is a power scaling metric that he blatantly stole from Shaki, who stated that Rayleigh was 100 times stronger than the supernova. So current Luffy, he sees Kizaru and he says, you know, I'm something of a Rayleigh myself. Even going so far as to mimic his mentor's method of engaging Kizaru with a big ol' kick. And who's to say that he's wrong? I look at that Luffy smile and I'm like, this boy got this. But do you know who doesn't got this? Who doesn't have it? Whatever it is, he doesn't have anything. It's Sentomaru, because he has nothing. So this is a weird one for me. This fight both went better and also worse than I expected. Better because, come on, it's Kizaru. It was never going to go well for Sentomaru. But also worse because I'm still waiting to see this greatest defense in the world that Sentomaru claims to have. And I don't know if we'll ever see it. So Sentomaru, he takes another L and ends up on the floor. But that aside, he did have some genuinely cool moments. Like when he grabbed his axe and did that nice heavy horizontal swing. A swing that, and you may not notice this immediately, Kizaru had to dodge. This was not his Logia doing all the work. And something we don't think about a whole lot these days is how haki interacts with Logia powers, because post-time skip has heavily focused on paramecia and Zoan abilities. And the few Logia users we have studied haven't exactly been the freshest fruit at the market. Carabo and Caesar were both easily dismissed by the mere mention of haki, so it's great to finally get back to an arc with some competent Logia users. Because I imagine that Sentomaru is imbuing his axe with haki. Someone of his level and of his very specific armament haki mastery is surely doing this, which is interesting because it means that in this panel, Kizaru is actually dodging. He's not letting Sentomaru cut through him. He actively has to separate his body to avoid a brutal chop death. So I guess the way Kizaru is fighting here is more akin to how Katakuri fights. He has to consciously Logia himself, sort of like manual breathing, which now both you and I are doing. But my question here is, does Kizaru have future sight? Not that he would have necessarily needed it for this strike, but I feel like at the higher levels it would be almost necessary for a Logia user. It would be pretty fun as well. The idea that Kizaru is so slow because he can afford to be casual. He always knows what's coming up and he can always maneuver to avoid it, so what's the rush? We also learn that Kizaru is the one who taught Sentomaru how to fight, which actually changes a lot. It definitely makes Kizaru a ton more terrifying. In the fanbase, he's often thought of as the admiral who relies a little bit too much on his Devil Fruit, and a lot of that is due to Film Z, where Zephyr told him exactly that. Zephyr was all like, well, Kizaru, you gotta use more haki. But this was back in the day when haki was brand new and fanciful concept. But after that non-canon film came out, there was this impression that Kizaru was ride or die for magical fruit, which is definitely not the case. Speaking of Zephyr, one of the unnamed vice admirals, who my artists refer to as Worm Admiral and Chin Admiral respectively, seems to have a very Zephyr-esque arm, which is really cool, and his whole design is starting to remind me a bit of Queen, because they both have rotund physiques, with vertical black and white striped clothing, and all of the cyborg parts. We get to see Dole in action as well, and I'm really glad that Oda is giving time to the Vice Admirals, and I really hope that there's going to be more. I've actually been working on a Marine video, and I counted them throughout the series. We've been introduced to at least 26 Vice Admirals, and despite their sheer numerosity, they almost never do anything. The Vice Admirals sent to any slobby sat pretty tight, and we also didn't get a whole lot of them during the Paramount War either. So I really want to see these guys in action. Although with the Pacifista on their side right now, there might not be much call for it. But in this chapter, we are treated to a flashback of child Sentomaru, who is adorable, such a sweet little dumpling, and Kizaru agrees. He even reminisces about how cute Sentomaru was back in the day. But none of this flashback was something that I expected to see. Sentomaru's past was revealed in a recent SBS, so none of the information in this chapter is actually new, but I'm still really glad to see it, because I'm not a huge fan of the recent trend of storytelling through extended media. Because Oda's strength isn't writing so much as it is marrying writing writing to perfect art. So it's the small things like seeing Sentomaru get really excited and drooling over onigiri, stuff that you really can't do with just words. Now, on the other hand, young Kizaru looks kinda homeless, or maybe like a stay-at-home stoner. Although it's now confirmed that at the time he was a Marine, and probably quite a high-ranking Marine as well. So Sentomaru is 34 years old, and according to the timeline, Kizaru joined the Marines 32 years ago. So this still would have been pretty early days for him. So I feel like he's probably around captain rank. That's the level where you start to get to go off and lead your own missions, or maybe even a Commodore. Or maybe even higher, considering that he's had this devil fruit potentially since he joined. So I imagine he was promoted quite rapidly, because you don't put the guy with the light low gear powers on as a chore boy, at least not for too long. But with this, Egghead has a bit of a theme going on here with admirals and their mentor-mentee relationships. Guzan, of course, betrayed his Marine mentor, and now Borsalino is in a situation where he has to stand against his own student. So I love all of the personal connections being examined, and my only wish is for more of it. But Kizaru does defeat Sentomaru and of course takes the Authority Cube. This chapter also has a quick recap of the cube hierarchy. In fact, I think almost every chapter where the cubes have been relevant does have a similar recap, because it's mildly complicated to keep up with. Probably not if you're reading chapters in bulk, but as a weekly experience, and especially with so many breaks, this information has a tendency to get dumped and forgotten by our mind brains. Hence why Oda always puts in the reminder. But in this hierarchy, attaining Sentomaru's cube would still put Kizaru below the Vegapunks, so they could take the Pacifista back, but that does seem unlikely. 50 Mark III Pacifista units are now under the control of the Marines. So I think that any hope of retaining Egghead Island is now officially lost. And knowing this, a certain Rob Lucci betrayed the group this chapter, although is betrayal really the right word? Let's be real here, he is quite the murdersome prick of a leopard, but he's also a very honest leopard. Lucci was incredibly honest about his intention from the get-go. It was Kaku who was the one who was trying to deceive Luffy and Zoro. So is anyone surprised that Lucci did this? And I don't just mean readers, I mean people in the world, the characters. Because we remember who this guy is, right? The murder-loving world government assassin. Although something quite fun is that this is even hinted on the cover of Weekly Shonen Jump this week. We have Luffy and a leopard running next to him, looking like he's going to pounce at any second. I will say that Lucci unexpectedly had the funniest line of the chapter. That part where he says that the combination of he and Kizaru mean that everyone is as good as dead. I got a good laugh out of that, because what I think he means to say is that now Kizaru is here, you're all as good as dead, and I, Rob Lucci, am also here. Dude thinks he's on the team. But regardless, Rob Lucci has engaged in fight battling with Zoro, which is very exciting, and I love Zoro's dialogue where he said, looks like he waited for backup to grow a spine. Because it's like, mate, this is why I own a life-size statue of you. Because I don't know how it's possible for a line to be so damn cold and yet achieve such a searing burn. We don't even need to do the fight. Lucci has already lost. But Zoro and Lucci is a very nice contrast to personalities. The assassin versus the swordsman. Because with Zoro, it's all about pride. He doesn't resort to underhanded tactics. It's just whoever is the best at the thing wins. Whereas Rob Lucci is completely different. He's an opportunist who only strikes at the most ideal moments. It's not about being the best. It's about finding the weakness of the person who is the best to then brutally kill murder them. I do really like the idea of the first mate taking on a former main antagonist though. It's a good way to show progress, and hey, maybe it'll start a trend of just passing Lucci down the line. Luffy beat him on any slobby, Zoro can beat him on Egghead, maybe in the next arc we'll pass him to Sanji and Sanji can do something. Although Sanji did already briefly face Rob Lucci in One Piece Stampede. What Lucci did accomplish here though was fingering Stussy, which is what he literally did. I don't necessarily want to say fingered, but I thought about it and none of the synonyms are any better. Because he doesn't shoot or stab her. I guess you could say he penetrated her, but again, same issue. And she's in pretty bad shape. Like Kaku, she's probably down for the rest of the arc, but unlike Kaku, she isn't stuck in bubble prison. Great Sanji moment there, by the way. This is one of those times where Sanji proves his infinite worth to the crew, because he has very quick thinking. On this occasion, he condemns Kaku to bubble prison, which is a very good idea, because even though Kaku is injured, all it takes is one precise action, and that is another dead Vegapunk. It's also not out of the question to think that, hey, maybe the secret agent assassin is just pretending to be injured and waiting for a chance to strike. So Sanji did some pretty swift calculations here. Although I do have one slight question, just one. I would say that it's particularly impressive that Sanji remained so calm considering that it was Stussy who got struck, because usually he would completely lose his mind if a woman was hurt. So I'm surprised he didn't insist on fighting Lucci himself for some sort of divine retribution. I do feel like we're still missing one key element of chaos here, because we've got Zoro handling Lucci, and as we'll talk talk about in a bit, we've got Luffy handling Kizaru. But I feel like there needs to be one more threat for the others to deal with, and we do have quite a few options for that. Firstly, I know I bring him up pretty much every week, but Caribou, he is on the island, he's in the lava phase, he's out there doing something. I don't know, maybe, I don't know that for a fact. Maybe he's doing nothing, but he is out there somewhere. Secondly, of course, we have the Blackbeard Pirates, and I think it would be particularly interesting to add a third-party faction. And I also think that a Titanic captain would present a real problem for the rest of the crew, and maybe give them a taste of their impending future. Then thirdly, and most obviously, is the Seraphim. If someone releases them from their various bubbles, then York's command is still active. So in regards to that, right now the Cypherpole agents are in the basement with the Seraphim, so there's a maybe scenario where they manage to escape, and S-Snake uses cuteness to get one of them to do something to get rid of the bubbles. And tell you what though, these bubbles are a game changer. This teeny tiny bubble gun has the power to incapacitate potentially any Devil Fruit user. Because if it can handle the Seraphim, then it's going to be a very short list of people who are not instantly beaten by bubbles. But where this chapter truly shines is with its many references to Sabaody, and that entire arc is now coming full circle. There's no less than 3 pretty blatant Sabaody mentions. The first is Usopp seeing Kizaru and flashing back to terror, just sheer terror. Kizaru himself then gets quite nostalgic over the last time he encountered the Straw Hats. Apparently that was a good day for him. I don't know why, because that was not a successful mission, not at all. He had them all cornered, and then each and every one of them managed to escape and become more powerful, and now he's an emperor. You messed up, Kizaru. This is probably the biggest blunder in the series. But the third Sabaody mention is of course Luffy. But one note about Luffy though. At the end of chapter 1090, he switched to his serious face when he sensed Kizaru. He had this look of utter dread. But then we cut to the first shot of Luffy in this chapter, and it shows him eating casually, as if he just sort of forgot about Kizaru. So what happened here, right, is that he felt Kizaru. Luffy went, uh-oh, this is a bad thing, but also I should really finish this meat first. So look, what this means is that Sentomaru's sacrifice will not be in vain, not at all, because he allowed Luffy to eat more food, which is canonically actually very useful. But then seeing Luffy kick Kizaru, it got me genuinely pumped. And it's absolutely surreal to see Kizaru actually needing to block an attack, instead of just turning into light, and especially an attack from Luffy. He's not even using advanced haki either. I mean, yeah, there's the black lightning, but Luffy is clearly making contact with Kizaru. Just like that. Contact. So this kick is just a warm-up. There's no gears either. This is just raw base Luffy within a sprinkling of haki. But what I love most is his smile, his confidence, because none of that was happening during Sabaody. Luffy was scared and ultimately in tears over his own powerlessness. But now Luffy knows that he can back this up. Also, small thing, Luffy remembered Kizaru's name. He called him Kizaru, not Light Guy or some sort of other Luffy-esque nickname. And I guess what this confirms is that Kizaru is the next Straw Hat. Luffy generally uses nicknames for everyone except for his crew. And that's why so many people were sold that Yamato wasn't going to join because Luffy had a nickname. And to be fair, they were right. But Luffy also remembers the names of people who have defeated him or proved themselves to him. For example, Kaido, Katakuri, Crocodile. So he views Kizaru as a very serious opponent. And paradoxically, that's probably why he's smiling like this. He has that Roger Whitebeard battle excitement going on. This isn't just a fight. This is genuine fun. Serious, but fun. So the big question, will Luffy defeat Kizaru? I don't know, but I do know one thing. He isn't going to lose. This is going to be a win, a tie, or a fight interrupted. The outcome for true Sabaody poetic justice would probably be ordering Esper to use his devil fruit to send Kizaru to the other side of the world, thus allowing Luffy to forget about him and just move on. Because it is so hard to see Luffy disengaging with Kizaru unless he is beaten or otherwise incapacitated, maybe by a bubble. Because Kizaru is relentless. He is not going to give in either. So he needs to be dealt with one way or another. But a reason for Kizaru not to outright lose is that a fight battling victory isn't the goal here. We're trying to make sure that Vegapunk escapes. That's our goal. And no pirate in this world has a record without retreat. Even Goldie Roger, the Pirate King, was notorious for running away even during his prime. Although one reason for Kizaru to be beaten is that at this point, everyone in the world would have to take Luffy seriously as an emperor. So we don't get any of this Rob Lucci, don't accept him business. Because just as a reminder, an admiral admiral in One Piece has never been defeated, at least not on screen. Except for that one time when it happened to Kuzan, but that was also by an admiral. But the most exciting reason I could think of to actually beat Kizaru would be that it would force Saint Saturn to act. To think that we've won, for the Marines to think that, we've lost, and at which point Saturn has to take matters into his own very elderly hands. So he gets up there, takes command priority over the Seraphim, and whips out his overwhelming silhouette-based powers. At some stage, he should at the very least take command of the Seraphim, because that's Chekhov's command cube. We don't say that the elders hold the highest authority to not see him use it. But let me know in the comments, Luffy versus Kizaru. How do you think this plays out?